That's why when people say that AI may take over communications,
Yes.
practitioners or may take over journalists or may I disagree. That's why I think my core communications career, read a room, look at your publics, know what your publics want, learn your environment and
Yes.
apply.
One of the reasons why I'm so happy to have you here is I'm glad to have someone who uses foreign languages. That's a male.
People will send Afro-Trimegonian men to me and say, oh, I think this is a good one for you to feature. And that's how it started. I feel like we existed, but we were always a great minority.
Yes.
You've been there.
Yes.
I've been there. There's Jean-Louis
Right.
Robinson. Me and Jean-Louis probably could speak, I think, over 5 or 6 languages very fluently.
Yes.
I don't think that I would have been here if I didn't have that foundation. And maybe if I started off with a
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone is well. Back here with another edition. I have with me a very special invited guest. His name is Dike Noel. Hi, Dike.
Hey,
Nice
Jason.
to see you again.
Good to see you.
So, I wanted to have you on and speak with you for a few reasons, right? So, one of the first is your career journey, and I think it ties in very well with languages. So, for those watching, would you mind sharing with us a bit your career so far in terms of what you've done since leaving school?
All right, so let me first start off by thanking you for inviting me. I really
Same.
applaud what you've been doing.
Thank
It's
you.
good to see people amplify language use and language proficiency in the way that you're doing, and finding cool ways to do it. Not just telling people you should study languages, but you're finding videos and creative ways to really just get the message out there. And I think it's really good work that you're doing. So
Appreciate that coming from you.
keep it up. I mean, I've been watching and really liking a lot of the content, so it's good, and I like that you're not keeping it rigid or stiff or strict on particular areas. You're sort of branching out. You're using different environments. You're diversifying it and making it good. So about me, from there, I worked at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and that's in the Spanish Implementation Secretariat. And incidentally, that was the year that Trinidad and Tobago was bidding to be the Secretariat of the Free Trade Area of the Americas.
Right.
And that fell through, and the government at the time progressed with the Spanish Implementation Secretariat to make Spanish the first foreign language of Trinidad and Tobago. And there were a number of my colleagues who did foreign languages with me at the University of the West Indies.
Right.
We all started to work together in the same secretariat. So it was a nice working environment. But for some reason, I gravitated more towards the communications aspects of the role.
Okay.
And because at that time I was a research officer, and it involved conducting research and working on projects, but there was also a communications element that I really gravitated more towards. And I realized that that's really where my career path would go. And from there, I went to after spending 4.5 years there in that secretariat at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, I then went to the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management as Public Information Specialist, which was a great experience. That's where I think my core communications career was birthed, and where I actually really enjoyed and started to love communications. And I realized that this would be my career. While I studied languages, having done an undergraduate degree in it at the University of the West Indies, I really found that I was better in the communication side of it, and that's why I really moved my career in that way. And from there, I worked in other state agencies, a few ministries, and then with some regional entities. And fast forward to now, I'm at the Caribbean Community Secretariat, CARICOM Secretariat, where I am the communications manager.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot. And a lot of experience with communication. And as I'm listening to you speak, I'm thinking about language, of course. I always have a bias towards languages. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, do you think that your involvement with foreign languages, Spanish, I believe more so in your case, you can correct me if I'm wrong, do you think that has had an influence on your professional path and in your work in communications?
Yes, so I did both Spanish and French, and while I worked at the Spanish Implementation Secretariat, I still also practice my French proficiency. I still try to maintain my French proficiency.
Okay.
And but one thing about learning languages is that you don't just learn the language, you learn the culture. And learning a language
Correct.
teaches you more about your own language. Learning a
Correct.
foreign language, that is, teaches you more about your own language. So, for example,
Well
in
said.
English, we don't formally use the subjunctive mode.
Yes.
Whereas in foreign languages, it's clear how you
Yes.
do verb construction and all of that.
Yes.
That you have to use the subjunctive, and
Yes.
you know about the perfect tense and
Yes.
the perfect tense and all these things that we don't identify
Yes.
in English.
Yes.
But in foreign languages, it's clear because
Yes.
that's how we learn to conjugate
Yes.
the verbs and
Yes.
the language. So language teaches you about culture, it teaches you about sensitivity, it teaches you about just diversity and what we know now as diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
Maybe back then it was always that, but it's now more popular now. But generally, you just learn a bit more about the language, the culture, the people. You learn a bit more about just general aspects of cultural awareness and sensitivity.
Yes.
So, and that lends itself greatly to communications. In communications, you have to read a room, look at your publics, know what your publics want, learn your environment, and
Yes.
apply your skills to execute certain strategies, certain outputs, and all of that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and like for me, this is the interesting thing in that even though I'm speaking to a lot of people in a lot of different environments, a lot of fields of work, I guess I'm always able to hear parallels in terms of, as you say, communication and how a foreign language or foreign languages, being able to master the use of a foreign language lends itself to applying certain concepts, certain ways of thinking and approaching things that could also apply themselves in other fields as well. Another topic that I would like to get your input in is the use of AI, artificial intelligence. So, because of the field that you currently work in, I don't want it to potentially cause any issues. But what I would like to ask is, do you use AI in your field of work? And more generally, what are your thoughts on AI and its implementation?
I think it's difficult not to use AI.
Okay, why do you say that?
In any field of work that you're in. I think AI, one of the benefits with AI, particularly for communicators, is that you may be able to synthesize and summarize information quicker, right? You may be able to get a shell of a concept. You could use a prompt, use specific prompts, and say, listen, I want you to create this for me, and you give the target audience, the everything, and it will create something. But the difference, what differentiates AI from a communications practitioner is that communications, it's an art and it's a science, and communications practitioners will know how to apply the art where necessary.
Yes.
They will know where to put what type of emotion to put with
Yes.
certain things, what type of cultural sensitivities
Yes.
to apply, where to put certain focal points, and
Yes.
where to emphasize. Whereas AI, while you could give all the prompts and try to be as clear and explicit as possible, you may not always get that. And that's why when people say that AI may take over communications,
Yes.
practitioners, or may take over journalists, I disagree, because it still relies on the art of it.
Yes.
Right?
Agreed.
And that's just my general opinion on AI use. It's unavoidable. You can't avoid using it in today's world and the world of work. But the application and the use of it just has to be carefully managed and managed.
Yes, agreed. So the parallel, well, one, I use a lot of parallels when talking about AI. And one that I tend to always fall back on is the profession of a secretary, and the tool being the computer, and then later the internet, right? So 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when the computer was now becoming more popular, people were having a similar mindset in thinking that here was this tool, this device that was coming, and because it was so powerful, it was able to do so many things, it was going to take over the functions of a secretary, right? I'm using that as a specific example. And people had this fear, because of the computer, you're not going to need a secretary anymore. But what happened is, as you just gave the example with in terms of AI, it's not that the job or the position was no longer needed. It was still needed and is still needed even today. It's just how the role is executed has changed. So before, a secretary would use a typewriter, now a secretary would use a computer. And before, secretary would have a huge, large filing system with millions of different files. Now all of those files are virtual. So similarly with AI, as you just said, those of us who are wise enough to implement AI and how we work, how we do prompts, how we prepare information, it can help a lot in synthesizing, making things easier, quicker, in order to get them prepared. But in order to properly execute what it is we are using, you're still going to need the human element, the artist, so to speak. So in your case, communications, in my case, languages, to be able to properly put that into place. Yes. So one thing that I wanted to ask you about in particular is your magazine called Mentions. For me, that's something that resonates because in my field, languages, it's a field where I see very, very little representation, especially by men. So like I'm one of the reasons why I'm so happy to have you here is I'm glad to have someone who uses foreign languages that's a male, as a man, that is able to show men that foreign languages is not just something for ladies. No disrespect to ladies, we love the ladies, but I want to be able to highlight men and to be able to show that there are men who are involved in foreign languages. But before I get to that, can you please tell me a little bit about mentions?
Right. So I'm so happy that it's still in circulation and that it's still, people are still discovering it because it's been since 2020, sorry.
Right.
It's been since 2020 during COVID that I launched Mentions. And I launched Mentions primarily to amplify voices of Afro-Trinidadian men. And no offense to any other races or men, but I do believe that there was at the time and probably still is to a certain extent negative stereotypes and prejudices when it comes to Afro-Trinidadian men, and I found that they were grossly exaggerated, and a lot of the things weren't really true. And I found it was important for Trinidad and Tobago society to also see Black men, Afro-Trinidadian men that are doing good things and that in their own fields, just progressing and advancing and succeeding without all the fanfare and all the noise and everything else. They're just doing what they need to do. And I intentionally didn't want to focus people who were already out there in the spotlight. I wanted to focus on people who were doing great things that many people didn't know about. And who had great stories. The intent was really to be mentioned, stories about us. That was the tagline, to show stories about us, because I firmly believe that representation is important. And in any sphere, it could be more representation of women, more representation of Afro-Trinidadian men, or whatever, or whomever. But representation is important. And while we may wish to downplay it sometimes, but we can't undervalue the importance of it. It's really critical. So it's really, I like that you call it a magazine, but it's actually a blog. And it started with really just stories. People will send Afro-Trinidadian men to me and say, oh, I think this is a good one for you to feature. And that's how it started. And in the first year, I did probably over 50 features. And then I kept increasing. And then I decided, okay, it was primarily a social media campaign. And that was how we would do the stories. And then I said, okay, let me finally create a website, which would be like a repository to hold all the information, like a permanent place. And that's how we just continued. I would admit, I haven't done a story in a long time. Busy.
Life is lifing.
Life is lifing. I feel like to write the stories, I have to be mentally in a place, and I haven't been. I haven't had those quiet moments really focused as I wanted to. But recently, I reposted an article because somebody who I featured he was appointed a judge. Okay. And he's now the Honorable Mr. Justice Raymond Roberts. And I reposted his story because Raymond's journey was just exceptional. He spoke about the challenges growing up, and then also after studying, and then he just progressed, and his career just went on. He was recently before that the registrar of the Supreme Court, and then he got appointed. I had reposted a story in a similar way of Mr. Justice Westman James, who also had a really unique story. He spoke about his personal challenges and the things he had to overcome to really succeed, and he got a scholarship and just did exceptionally well. And there are so many others who have featured. I even widened it and started to feature people from across the region. When I said, okay, let me try to also be a bit more inclusive in terms of focusing on some people from across the region,
Okay.
and not just only Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, as I said, and not meaning to do a shameless plug, but for those who are interested, could go on to mentions-tt.com
Right.
and look at some of these stories, really great stories of people whose journeys many people may not even have been aware of,
Yes.
and may not have known certain things that they may have had to overcome to
Yes.
succeed. I mean, there's also David Roberts, who grew up in Maloney, and I remember David Roberts. When I found out, his journey, and I was surprised, because one, looking at the outside, one would not know about all these or people's personal journeys and what they've had to overcome and their triumphs. And he went on to be CEO of TTT. He became a permanent secretary. He's now a permanent secretary in Bermuda. So there are many people who've been accomplishing, and many Afro-Trinidadian men that have been accomplishing and doing great things. So that's really how it started. And in terms of men in languages, I mean, I feel like we existed, but we were always the great minority.
Yes.
We always existed, and we were always there. We just were always in the minority.
Yes.
I mean, you've been there.
Yes.
I've been there. There's Jean-Louis Robinson, who's just been a lover of languages forever. I mean, Jean-Louis probably could speak, I think, over 5 or 6 languages very fluently now, and he teaches, I believe, German, and so he's just been a lover of languages. And there are so many other men, and yes, there were stereotypes about men who did languages before, but I feel like we've gone to a place in 2025, at least I hope that in 2025, we're at a place where those issues are no longer as prevalent. I remember in my year, I believe I was the only guy who did languages, who finished it.
Right.
I think others may have started. I'm trying to remember who now. It feels like so long ago. But others would have started, and then they would have changed course, or probably would have pursued law or done other things. But there have been others. There's Anton, a guy named Anton who did languages. He did French. I mean, as I said, there are just so many others who. And after me, I mean, I graduated since 2006, so there would have been many others after me, who would have been doing great work in the language field. And some may not have gone on to be teachers. They may have gone on to be interpreters, translators, or move into other fields, as I did. Yeah. But applying the skills that they had, and the skills that they learned, and the knowledge to their new field and their new career.
Yeah, definitely. And something that you said that resonates with me is somebody that you were describing and saying that people will not even know their story. Mm-hmm. And that's why mentions, for example, resonates with me. And that's why I think part of what we are trying to achieve as well, the importance of being able to disseminate not just my personal story, but that of others. So, for example, I have you here. Mm-hmm. You don't know somebody who may be interested in communication, for example, and might be telling themselves, but I just study in French, or I am only interested in French and Spanish. It's only in seeing people who would have applied certain things and reached a certain point, and seeing that person today and hearing their story and hearing where they started and where they ended up. It could help for people, I think, to be able to identify and see themselves in that, which is why I'm so grateful to have people like yourself to be able to not only for you to highlight other people's stories, but your story is worth highlighting as well. So thank you so much for that. One last thing that I would like to do, we've started this feature where our last guest would leave a question without us knowing in advance who the next guest would be. So our last guest was Megan Nurse, and her question was, how has a foreign language benefited your life?
I think foreign languages just paved the way for the type of career that I have today. It really set the tone, and while I didn't stay in the foreign language field, but it certainly set the tone for the type of career that I have, the type of life that I have, the type of things that I pursue. Foreign languages really set that tone. It was the foundation. And it really helped because while I indicated earlier all that it would have done professionally, or in terms of helping you to understand your own language, your own native language, helping you to communicate better, helping you to have deeper cultural awareness and appreciation. Those are all the things that led to the professional. But I do think that foreign languages really, they were the foundation. and to this day, I have a few good friends that I met from the foreign language program at the university. We call ourselves the Frenchies. They are far advanced than I am, and they've gone on permanently to be translators and interpreters. Jean-Louis Bernard Robinson, Crystal Austin, Kayana Lamette. Kayana worked at the ACP Secretariat, is now at the UN, and Gisela Bernardo. She did French as a minor, but majored in economics, and she's doing fabulous in Norway. She was in charge previously of the countries in Africa that still speak French.
Right.
And her foreign language skills help that. They set the foundation for her to merge and find that happy medium between economics, international relations, and French language. So I do feel that French has been the foundation for many things. French and Spanish have been the foundation for many things in my life, and in terms of on the professional, but also the personal. And I wouldn't downplay it at all or minimize the importance that it has had in my life. And when I see colleagues and former lecturers and it's interesting to know how they've actually followed my career and are happy with how it's been going. And I tell them it's just because of foreign language skills and that exposure that it gave. Because when you think the program at the university, you don't only learn about the language, and that has its benefits, but you also learn the literature, you learn history, you learn literary analysis, you learn culture. If you want to go a little deeper, you could go more into the cultural aspect or stay with the literature and the language, but still do things like literary analysis and the translation. And so, there are so many benefits for foreign language. And so they've really helped my career in ways that, as I said, I don't think that I would have been here if I didn't have that foundation. And maybe if I started off with a degree in communications, maybe I wouldn't have been at this particular juncture. So I think everything happens for a reason. Things lend themselves to each other and they roll into each other. In terms of how our lives unfold.
Yeah.
And I fully believe in that today. So.
Okay, well, Dike Noel, Mr. Dike Noel, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, I didn't throw my question back to the next person. I didn't throw my question.
Sure.
Okay, so I'll look at this. So to the very important person who's going to hold this, because I know everybody who Jason interviews is important. I think that even if you yourself may not think you're important, he still like to do
correct,
and you're important because he sees the value in your work. So to the next person, whoever he or she may be, what will you tell your teenage self if you had the opportunity now to do so? And I leave you that question because it's a question I ask myself all the time. So what will you tell your teenage self if you had the opportunity to do so?
Awesome question. Awesome. So Dike, thank you again.
No, thank you very much. And all the best. I continue doing this great work. It's a great platform. I'm really happy that I was able to do it. I know it seemed at some point as if it wasn't going to happen. So I was really
God
happy.
works in mysterious ways.
I'm really happy that it happened, and it happened. It happened very easily and seamlessly, and that we were able to come and do it.
Thanks be to God.
Yeah.
All right, man, Dike. Thanks again. All right, everybody, take care and have a pleasant